We are again.
How are you?
Can't complain, just sitting in here and weathering the storm some more.
In our last meeting, we talked about what we covered next, and I gave two choices. I thought I would add a third choice that would perhaps be more get to the point faster,
Right?
more concise. And so if I share my screen right now,
Yes.
right, I'll share my screen.
There we go.
I think a lot of people have been with us for reciprocity, and a few have been with us for truth. Certainly reciprocity and property in toto, what we call demonstrated interest. A lot of people know that's a foundation because a lot of people came over for libertarianism. Truth is quite a bit harder. We haven't got to that yet, but it's okay. The ternary law of cooperation, which avoids the weakness in like libertarian and other utopian bodies of thought, which actually clarifies the first principles of getting to cooperation. We've been over that. We've been over cooperation itself, what the general rules of cooperation are. We've talked about the human origin of all behavior, which is all human behavior can be reduced to an expression of acquisition, preservation, or retention, or consumption. And we talked about how this is time, acquisition, biological economy, neural economy, the prey cycle, and the mindfulness cycle as the hierarchy of how our brains are organized. And that's really just it's just basically the neural economy. So we've talked about that. Now we had the choice to go up into like the foundations, which is existence, computation. This is a pretty abstract subject, and I'm like, oh, I don't really want to drag people through that right yet, because I think that reciprocity and cooperation is a better grounding. And then later we can go on and ground reciprocity, cooperation, behavioral acquisition into as an expression of continuous recursive disambiguation or evolutionary computation. And the other option was to go through and continue with scale of cooperation, which is the positiva, which is to talk about the organizational structure of mankind. Well, I thought instead that I would continue with given that we got to the institution of property, right? We've gone through property, we're talking about rights, then we would go to the preservation by the institutionalization of those, of insurance of those demonstrated interests. So I thought we would instead continue on the legal frame instead of the social scientific or linguistic, which means logical, or the physical, the first principles frame of evolutionary computation. Because you really have those four problems you have to solve, right? There's big things you have to understand. Why? Because there's four sciences. The logical sciences, the physical sciences, the behavioral sciences, and the evolutionary sciences. So there's really just these four pieces you've got to know. And so we're just saying that, damn, that pattern shows up in everything. I wonder why, because it's before, during, and after. Anyway, so what I thought we would do this is we would go from talking about property and rights and privileges to how do we ensure them? Because that was the problem we talked about yesterday. With rights, we can need rights, we can want natural rights, we can want contract rights, we can want privileges, we can want all sorts of criminal privileges, right? We can want good privileges and bad. So, but the thing is that everybody lumps this all together as rights, which is a nice word for saying, I just wanna. It doesn't have any legitimacy behind it. So I would say, okay, so how do we get to producing a condition of reciprocity? So in other words, how do we preserve cooperation if reciprocity is the means by which we cooperate? In other words, it's the only time we have incentive to cooperate without retaliation. In other words, it's not, if you want to retaliate it, you haven't been cooperating. You've been stolen from.
That's right. That makes sense to me.
So over in the Constitution, we start with the physics, the laws of nature. Then we go into man, which is the stuff we're covering now. And then I've got a summary of the law I'm working on. I'm trying to make a dummies version. And here's Article 2, which is the rule of law. So what do we mean? So how do I want to start this narrative? So how do you resolve conflicts? Right? That's the problem.
So disagreements,
Right?
there's a, yeah, it's like, how do you resolve, like, in a civil manner, right?
Mhm.
Or other, I guess.
Such that we preserve cooperation,
Yeah.
right?
So with
Yes.
reciprocity then, right?
Well, you solve for reciprocity, right? You solve-
Okay. Like that.
Now, the problem is your judgment of, so it's me, and that's really fairness. Right? The problem is we can define reciprocity very clearly,
Yeah.
but what you perceive fair is a scale problem. What's fair between you and your mom?
Right.
What's fair between you and your siblings? What's fair within your family? What's fair within your extended family?
Right.
What's fair within your clan? What's fair within your tribe? What's fair within your society? What's fair within your polis or polity? What's fair within your state or nation? What's fair within your civilization? What's fair within your race? What's fair across races? So the problem is what's fair actually changes.
Based on scale, right?
So the classic example of in economics is that the ethics of your, or the fairness of your home is basically communism, right? But the fairness of the of the world is natural law. So the natural law is prohibitive. It just says what you can't do because other people will retaliate against you. But it's actually a problem of accounting at different scale. So does your knowledge of what's fair scale to the family, to the extended family, to the clan, to the tribe, to the society, to the nation polity, to the, well, at what point do you lack the information to know what's fair and what's possible to be fair? Now, what happens is the person thinks, well, everybody's like me. They're purely good-hearted like me, except you're not purely good-hearted, neither am I. We're all amoral, right? And we are as moral as we are willing to be. So what happens is people defect, they cheat all the time, right? And since the problem is we have unequal value to each other. We're unequal in value to others. And so there is what's fair at the family level is pretty equalitarian. What's fair at the political level is fairly meritocratic. And what's fair at the international level is simply doing no harm. So what we have is a decrease in the positiva and an increase in the negativa effect of cooperation, of what's fair. And so the problem is, it's like, I wish Oprah would tell this to more often. She has a story. How are you going to feel about it in an hour? How are you going to feel about it in 3 days? How are you going to feel about it in 3 years? And how are you going to feel about it in 30 years? I think it's 3 hours, 3 days, 3 years, 30 years. And I remember she teaching that. I just like, would you just say that to women every day? because that's actually the problem. It's the same thing with economies, the economy of your household, your business, your industry, your polity, your state, right? Your nation, your civilization, right? Your empire, your federation, and your civilization. That economy works by completely inverse rules by the time you get to the end that your household operates by, right? Because you have the knowledge to operate your household. The average idiot presumes he has the knowledge to operate the society. Absolutely does not.
Right.
The law, the courts assume that none of us, and our Constitution in particular, assume none of us have the knowledge to make judgments to the economy. That's why we have democracy. So the problem is that you have a supply-demand curve that crosses over in the concept of knowledge, fairness, and reciprocity. So what occurs because of this is we develop norms, habits, norms, traditions, and values,
Yeah.
right, and metaphysical assumptions that let us organize by whatever means our group organizes to impose the least irreciprocity on each other. Now, when I live in a tribal community, live in a tribal community that's still has warriors, let's say. So you have individual families, like paternal line families. What's fair in a hunter-gatherer village may be one thing. If you're just serfs and there's an aristocracy out there of males, it's really easy to produce a matrilineal polity without males, because the male's purpose has been eradicated, which is the defense is externalized. So you get like those, like Mobo or whatever they are in China, Sichuan and province, and there's another Yunnan province. They have a small polity that's matriarchal and matrilineal.
Huh.
And the men basically slaughter animals and they stay with their mother and sister and sisters, etc. And they stay in the female family and help that family. Well, the reason for that's extraordinary poverty, because it's a much more competitive system to have marriages, right? I mean, they can't compete, which is why they disappear. Or was I going?
Scale. Metaphysical assumptions.
Right. So the problem is what you think is going to work at some scale doesn't work at another scale under different pressures.
Right.
So a lot of the things people like because circumstances have eliminated some evolutionary pressure. Right. So serfs, long-term serfs, can afford certain behaviors, or long-term peasants, right, can afford some behaviors, frankly, because there's nowhere for their children to go.
Right.
Right, because the economy has been stagnant for so long and they live a subsistence living. Right. And worse, there's nowhere for their men to go if there's no industry. There's no means of promoting traveling males who can increase capital. Women can do light farm work. They can't do the slaughter, etc., like that, but they can generally do the large animals. And they generally don't do construction, but they can run the farm and taking care of feeding the animals.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a bunch of things that happen because of external circumstances, not ideals, right? Right. So these things vary. Again, lost what I was talking about. Scale.
Scaling, right.
Okay, so the problem is, as you scale, you get closer and closer to natural law, because the only thing we know is what not to do. As you shrink, we get closer and closer to social, so what we think of as the family's economy.
Yeah, it requires a positiva.
It requires a positiva.
You're obligated to do this thing, otherwise we're going to die or something.
Right. And the same thing for norms and traditions and values. some sets of norms and traditions are apparently immoral, but if you look at their origins, they're moral, right? They're not, you know, even like some of the most horrible stuff in the world, it turns out to have an originally moral ambition. So the problem is that small and near and informed makes it possible for me to possess the knowledge to distribute what the resources under my that I can measure, I can calculate. But as you get larger, you lose that ability at the point where you need markets. So, or you begin to have markets, because there's no other way to calculate the use of resources, because nobody can know anything. And worse, you can manage incentives at the family level and the extended family level, because you know who's lying, cheating, stealing, and being lazy and whatever, and you can discipline them. But you can't do that at the national level, because once you have market, you need market. You can't provide, you can't manage incentives except with the market. And so at the international level, there is no via positiva other than natural laws. Or reciprocity is the only thing that prevents us from killing each other. Right. So, unfortunately, the American government tries to do good, right, which is why it fails all the time, because understand that every attempt to do good is bad, where every attempt to suppress near reciprocity is good. So everybody wants to go around and virtue signal because they're caring for others, which actually destroys their local adaptation. Instead of going around and saying, if the only thing we can do of value is impose rule of law, that's the only thing we can do, and we can train people how to be lawyers. It's actually fairly hard. We don't think of it that way, but it's really hard to think like a European. In fact, there's a couple of books written not too long ago that's like, can non-Europeans actually think?
Why?
So we can prove they can, because we've spent the time to get them there. But it's still pretty obvious the difference between an Anglo, a German, you know, a Russian, a Frenchman, and an Italian. We think differently, even though we're in the same civilization. Certainly the Ashkenazi think very differently from the rest of us. So, I mean, and when you get out to different civilizations, I mean, the importance of the noun versus the verb in Asia has been inverted. So that's a profoundly different metaphysical assumption about the word. So scale is a profound problem. And so what everybody wants, of course, is that they were educated by their family and they assume that scales. I grew up in a small town. You fucking say hi to everybody.
Yeah.
Right, you know? If somebody knocks on your door, you're not afraid. You're like, how can I help you? Right? I mean, that's just how things work. You know, we didn't lock our doors or our cars or anything, right? It's 10,000 people, you freaking know. I mean, you know who the 10 bad families in town are, right? I mean, and even those, they tend to be,
they're civilized.
they tend to be more mischief makers.
Right.
Right. I couldn't believe the difference moving from rural New York to middle central Connecticut and the level of crime. I mean, you just actually had to think about it. Then when I lived in Boston, you like live to defend yourself from crime.
Right.
So scale doubles everything. Every doubling in scale produces a 20 to 25 increase in goods and bads. So anyway, now that I've got across that the problem isn't an ideal type, it's a supply-demand problem given the available information, right? Information generates demand for via positiva. Ignorance generates demand for via negativa. I'm going to capture that.
That's right. I like that.
So this is again why, like, the Chinese government can catch up, but Europeans are much better at invention, right? I mean, And so if you look at countries by their trust axis and by their degree of imposition of via negativa instead of via positiva, you will see the rate of productivity of the economy. If you map that against IQ, you've explained the whole world. So Russians are lower because they have lower trust, because they're farther east from the explosion, the Atlantic explosion of modernity, right?
Right.
Whereas, what did I just say? They're farther east, they're lower trust. And so they're going to obviously expand on they're going to generate more authoritarianism. So this is the problem. If ignorance generates demand for via negativa, that's rule of law.
Wait, this is good.
Right?
This is it's natural law.
Via positiva, meaning authority.
Yes, which is interestingly, that's the feminine pattern.
Correct. So it's not surprised by women prefer, and they run authority. I mean, if you find those matriarchal societies, they're authoritarian. We just think because women are in charge, it's a better authoritarian. Well, it turns out to be okay at small scales, but they have no political systems. That's why it's possible to have women in charge. Because the conflict is within family and within knowledge. But the minute you get scale, you need men, because men systematize rather than empathize. All right. So via positiva, meaning authority, and ignorance generates demand for via negativa, meaning rule of law. That produces markets. Right? So markets calculate knowledge.
Right. Distributed awareness.
So authority, it's not like, so people ask me the other day, is there ever a case for authority? Yeah, war. Is there ever a case for an authoritarian, a largely authoritarian government? Absolutely, when you're really far behind economically, right? I mean, right? You can't put the market in control until you have enough of a middle class to run a market. It's like saying, I can't give the authority to the state without bureaucracy. I mean, there's nobody to do the work.
Right.
So knowledge generates demand for the via positiva, authority, tradition, norm, tradition, authority, values, tradition, norms, etc. Right? Hold on, I might want to change that. Ignorance demands for. The problem is there's a middle ground here, which is the strategy.
Yes, which is that there's it's the trifunctional system, which is the compromise is made between these two scalable functions.
So
which is this is your group evolutionary strategy.
Correct. So you have this beginning problem of you have to organize, right? At some point, you have to have some authority, right? Because you need a means of decidability, a means of reconciling differences. And hopefully what you want to do is, do I reconcile? What knowledge do I use? What means of decidability? Right. So we can say we need to preserve cooperation. We need a means of decidability. Knowledge generates demand for the via positiva. Like if I know what's going on, I can be authoritarian. If I know that we're behind and what to do, I can be authoritarian. If the economy doesn't matter, survival does, I need to be authoritarian.
Right.
Right? If I have ignorance, then I have to generate demand for the via negativa, meaning I just have to eliminate the bad so that because we can't tell people what the good is. But what's the scope of evolutionary computation? This is high evolutionary computation, right?
Wait, what?
High evolutionary computation. And this is low evolutionary computation. But high intentional adaptation. Right? So I can come from behind. In other words, if you know what to do, it's easy to use authority. But if you don't know what to do, right? And then you need to have that, and I'm gonna put this here.
Yes.
And the result is that you generate a demand for utility, which is you normalize these calculations.
Well, you systematically into your informs all the individuals in the group.
And what does that do? As such, you reduce the need for knowledge. Right? So the positiva.
Wait. This is the need for knowledge is the demand for knowledge is is the opposed to neural parsimony.
I don't want to say that. I'll miss it. So, so, it's like, it's kind of stupid. We're trying to let me just go through. So those results. So knowledge generates demand for the positiva. Ignorance generates demand for the via negativa. Whoops. Results generate.
It's an interesting function there because it's like ignorance is associated as a negative thing in general, but it's like ignorance is cultivated at scale because I have confidence in your behavior because you have shared the same neural economy because we're discounting our costs by our via negativa agreement.
Correct. We've eliminated the need to predict each other's behavior. And in doing so, we've eliminated the anxiety or reduced our probability of failure. So we've created a discount on cooperation.
That's trust and confidence.
So what is, well, we've said this before, mindfulness is a normal need for a social creature, because basically we're a bunch of super predators, right? And so what you of course want is I mean, assuming your mother's not a jerk, you want the same trust with others that you have with your mom, right? I mean, that would be the sort of thing that you want. You want to be able to implicitly trust others. And so the problem is the more you worry, right, the less mindfulness you have. The more neurotic your personality, the more mindlessness you have, right? In other words, the more neurotic your personality, the more worry you have, the more uncertainty you have, the more you feel threats of others.
Right. It means you have to, you're calculating all the time. It's a high consumptive of neural potential.
Correct. It's really exhausting. And of course, we know what happens with exhausting a neural potential. It ends up in depression. And if it isn't corrected, it ends up in psychosis.
Right. It's like the person has to shut down because it's too much stimulation.
And it can't win. Right. And what does your brain do? You get attention by finding victory. Right. If you can't get any positive feedback, you're basically burning your brain. So what we've tried to get to here is there is a need for rules.
A demand. The demand for it's the demand for agreement, right? Terms of cooperation, right? Based upon the scale.
So I want to make sure I don't jump too many sleeps ahead. So we want rules of proof, and then we need dispute resolution. We need a means of people who can resolve disputes, right?
There you go.
Right. So we're going now. Why are we? Well, actually, that's the question I was asking.
Because what happens when we have a disagreement in our civil society, right?
Yeah, I just don't know where to put it.
I think you're there. I think it's the right order.
I'm missing this one, which is what causes disputes. And that's differences.
The disagreement, right?
Well, disagreement doesn't matter unless it's a dispute, right?
Right.
And that's because of the slope under the triangle. So what happens is we have differences in age, sex, class, knowledge, sex, ability, class, right? And we have, great, I think I covered it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? In other words, so what happens is that we form networks of sustainable production, distribution, and trade. Now, you may not think that network in your family is terribly complicated.
Right.
Turns out it is, though. Try to be a parent and you find out that the network of this extended childhood we put people through today versus my grandmother knitting and selling mittens to lumberjacks at age 4, right? Or the girls that worked in at age 5, they were 3, 4, and 5 worked in bookbinding because their fingers were small enough to sew them, right? I mean, childhood is an invention,
Right.
right? So, but the point I want to get across here is evolutionary computation under the triangle, female, male, reciprocal, right? Priesthood, state, law. So the area of the triangle is what we're trying to maximize. But the bigger that triangle gets, the base the triangle gets, the taller the triangle gets, the more surface area of space and time and opportunity we calculate. Well, the more we are specializing into specialized networks of distribution trade. So the norm we experience in our home, in our neighborhood, in our social group, in our occupation may differ from the norm in someone under a slightly different one. Both conditions might be reciprocal, internally reciprocal, but that doesn't mean they're externally reciprocal. In other words, it doesn't mean your norms, traditions, values, etc., within a given sect or sector or discipline or craft or art or whatever. That doesn't mean that what's okay there is okay elsewhere. Right now, what you're seeking is to provide those. In other words, all social groups, political groups, try to find them. But at some point, because we flock and swarm and school, humans do that, is the difference is we defect pretty easily. And so what happens is that if somebody sees an opportunity, they defect to it pretty quickly. So we're always trying to find the first principle of decidability in any group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? That first principle decidability would always be coherent with its or consistent with its group evolutionary strategy. Yes?
I think so. I'm trying to the group evolutionary strategy is defined by this via negativa and the via positiva, and the balance that is made in cooperation that follows from that. How we cooperate to integrate those. I want to. There's a time function that's not accounted for here.
I think I'm trying to get to it.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll catch up soon. I turned you off. Why are you on? Turn off? Yes. Thank you. So
Evolutionary strategy looks like the the demand for rules, the terms of cooperation is the group evolutionary strategy, the general agreement between the members of the group for what is right, what is wrong, and what the value should be.
Yeah, but it's very easy, very common for people to express those in analogical, moral, or narrative terms without actually knowing. Like, you know, I wrote down a European group evolutionary strategy. We'll get to a little bit later. Like, how many people can cite that? Well, nobody. I mean, there's fragments of it throughout the
Right.
literature,
Right.
but there's no analytic. In other words, there's no construction from first principles other than
We're in agreement.
So the problem is it's hard. Nobody, and we're in the one civilization that's good at deflation and disambiguation into first principles. Everybody else is terrible at it.
It goes like this. So the premise in my mind here for the construction of this document that we're working on, this is general for humans, for all humans.
Yep.
These rules apply to all humans. And we can specify the law is also the product of, because that's where we're headed.
I think where we're headed is, so societies evolve the incremental So I get teased for inventing this term, right? Incremental suppression. Do I have it? I think I have it here. I finally got SSL working on this thing yesterday. Oh my God, what a nightmare. I've never had so much problem. Which means I get to have secure transmission without because I was just pegging the server over and over again before. There we go. Watch, there'll be something in here I wish I didn't share. Where is it? You know, all these diagrams I use.
It's a lot of them.
Looking for a very common one I shared all the time. Early on. Look. No. Anyway, it's a
Sure.
graph that grows up. This is my section on the mathematics of beauty.
Okay,
Not that anyone cares, but I think it's fascinating. All right, I can't.
I've exhausted my opportunity for the morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Shoot.
No, it's
All right.
okay. We're getting there. So that was good work to have accomplished that bit.
All right, so we covered. All right, I'll summarize what we did for next time, and then we'll pick up, because what we're trying to do is cover what does incremental suppression mean? That's the process, and who are the people, right? And it produces what institutions.
All right. What we'll do,
And I wasn't watching the time, I'm sorry.
no, we're good. We're good. And very enjoyable.
All right, boss, take care.
Yes, sir. I'll send you the link.
Bye.
Bye-bye.